Will redistricting reward Republicans in a big way? I couldn't do the alliteration all the way through, but there's a lot of discussion already right now about how the redistricting that was so controversial in Florida, what's it going to mean for these districts that have been changed? Jared Moskowitz, up-and-comer in Congress, suddenly finding himself going to have to run in a new district. Republicans said to be chomping at the bit that South Florida congressman, they hope they can boot out and get a Republican in there, because he's now going to be running in a Florida 25th congressional district that's basically runs from South Palm Beach County all the way down to Miami Beach. But it's all part and parcel of what we're going to see this fall about how much redistricting impacts what happens in the state of Florida, where Republicans hope to pick up several seats and help maintain their majority in Congress. It's going to be interesting, Brian.
Oh, yeah.
Not just with him.
And let's not forget that historically we may have the shortest congressional campaign in the history of the entire country. Sara Baxter. She announced.
Yeah, but before we
and
go
within
to
a day, she was out.
Yeah, I want to talk. Okay, that's too good not to talk about. We'll get back to Moskowitz. What the heck was going on with her? She's county commissioner, announcing, unannouncing. So, yeah. So you got me hooked. We'll get back to Moskowitz.
No, I'm just pointing that out.
Okay.
No, Donald Trump didn't want her running for Congress and announced that he really wanted her to run for county commission, and she basically went, "Oops, going to run for county commission."
You'd kind of think they'd all coordinate that ahead of time. I actually was
24 hours.
I was at the grocery store where you don't normally hear inside politics stuff bubble up, and somebody's walking by and said, "Do you hear about the whole Baxter campaign?" But all's back. The world's back on its axis. She's not running for Congress, but it does speak to that she at least had hoped to take advantage of a new district, of a newly redistricted.
That ran from Palm Beach County all the way to Marco Island.
The West Coast.
Yeah.
So actually, all kidding aside.
Which is a long drive on the weekend.
Yeah. It's an example of how redistricting is really upsetting the apple cart. Back to somebody like Moskowitz has started building his own bit of a national profile, and yet who knows what will happen in 25. Trump won what will now be that district by, I think, 8 or 9 points the last cycle. Doesn't mean a Democrat can't and won't overperform there. But, Brian, it really does throw everything into a whole different
and who's
look.
And his Republican opponent is?
Well, he's got Scott Singer may be running.
Right.
Former Mayor Boca. The list goes on and on and on. A growing number of opponents. Dan Francisi, Scott Singer, just to name two, are competing for the GOP side there. So it's going to be interesting. We've had a few of them on either this or our old public affairs show. So it's going to be interesting how it plays out. But it just shows that what suddenly you woke up at the start of the year thought was a safe district, with all the redistricting that both Democrats and Republicans have been doing. Well, that's going to be interesting this fall about what it means for the shape of things in Florida.
Moskowitz has developed a very high profile. Yeah. I mean, he goes on to the podcast and cable shows and
all the time,
and he's very articulate and knows how to throw a punch without it feeling like a punch. So I'm sure the Republicans would love to take him out.
Talk about this, Brian. It's a national story, but it also has some roots in what we're seeing in Florida. There's been a lot of talk about more progressive push, certainly in some cities, Democratic Socialists saying that they hope to get rid of establishment Democrats. May not be to that point in Florida, but you are seeing, we've had, we've heard a lot of talk about people pushing more progressive platforms here. It's interesting what's going on in a number of other races. A progressive has been endorsed, and this is interesting to me, in Florida's 20th, where you now have Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because of redistricting, is going to be running there. Sheila Sherfless McCormick, who got out of the House just as a ethics committee investigation was starting to crash down, is running again, and yet a progressive is being supported by at least one person in the House. And it just speaks to the fact that there is a push to see if progressive candidates might be able to dislodge some more establishment candidates. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz has her own problems, a longtime Weston, Broward-based congresswoman whose district's like, my district's being upended. I'm trying to run in 20, and they don't want me there because they say I'm infringing on what had traditionally and still will maintain a majority black vote. So a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, no, and I think that when you look at what's happening with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, you wind up, she's getting a lot of pushback from the community there. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not she can pull off that race with all the pushback she's getting. The progressive movement within the Democratic Party reminds me of the 2010 Tea Party start. When the Republicans, a lot of people didn't recognize the Tea Party movement when it started. I can remember going to a Tea Party event, not knowing what to expect, and looking, and I'm seeing all kinds of professionals and career people and, people who just, hard workers and everything, and just a whole spectrum of Republican society there. And I'm thinking, there's something going on here, So the Tea Party movement was, started that whole push that gradually led us to the hardcore Republican Party we see in many respects today. So among Democrats, you have this younger generation of Democrats, and some of this is going on in the Republican Party as well. This younger generation is basically looking at baby boomers and saying, get out of the way, it's our turn. You haven't accomplished the things we want to accomplish. And that's not all that unusual by itself. The younger generation wants the old folk to get out of the way. We got people that have been in Congress for 40 years. You kind of look going, and what did you accomplish during that 40 years other than getting yourself a great pension and great health care benefits? So a lot of them are sitting going, we want, various things accomplished, and they're not getting accomplished because these people have been in Congress forever can't accomplish anything. So, I think it's normal. I think it's healthy. Right now it feels very divisive among some Democrats, and they worry about it. Sort of Mondami in New York. He's in one way he's a gift to the Republicans. He's a self-proclaimed socialist with all these, I'm going to have, city-run grocery stores. I'm going to do, and that's not the Democratic movement. That's what happened in New York, with this one guy. And, but, he becomes an easy target. AOC is, she becomes an easy target. But is that the Democratic Party? Not entirely. Just like the hardcore in the Republican Party isn't the entire Republican Party. So, yeah, you're going to have divisions and you're going to have pushback, and there's going to be some changes as a result of it because, some of these people who have been in political office for many decades, they need to step aside.
Let me throw one wild card at you.
Sure.
Cuba. Been a lot of talk, change could be afoot, in Cuba. The Trump administration's made no secret of the change you would like to see, and many are saying, could it be the next Venezuela in terms of the U.S. Trying to step in there? That would certainly make for an interesting dynamic in a fall campaign here.
Sure.
And that's the understatement of the year.
It is the one area where if you're running for office in Florida, especially statewide office, but if you're running for local office in South Florida and especially in the heavily Cuban communities, you have to be anti Fidel
Castro regime and his follow-ons.
And it's you have to be very hardcore in what you expect about Cuba. So it's hard sometimes to compromise and work things out. But the Cuban government not recently said something about making it, taking state-run businesses and turning them over to entrepreneurs. They're desperate. Cuba's in horrible straits because of the lack of oil and energy. They may be lower than they've ever been from the standpoint of their economy and the poverty that's taking over. So, it's possible that we may be approaching a point where there'll be fundamental change, that the kind of fundamental change that Cuban Americans have been looking for since Fidel Castro took over in 1959.
Yep.
This may be that moment. We'll see.
Yeah. What else is on your plate here?
I have no plate. We've never been there. I don't have a plate.
Yes, you do.
I didn't even have breakfast. This
You
morning.
said,
It
well,
was
don't
like
be
not to have
grumpy. I
breakfast.
didn't. You
I'm
should have had
feeling a little
breakfast.
grumpy. Did you have breakfast?
I did have breakfast. That's why.
Well, you get up at the crack of dawn.
Well, I do.
Well, you get up at like 4:30, don't you?
You do too. I know because you have a dog that gets you up at 4:30.
Sometimes
Anyway.
gets me up, but I don't like getting up.
Yeah.
that early. I'm a night person.
I've gathered
You go to
that.
bed at like 7:30, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I wish. That's my nap. And anyway, Alligator Alcatraz been in the news.
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately, I think, historically, Alligator Alcatraz, forget what you're trying to do about illegals and all that kind of stuff. The very fact that they called it Alligator Alcatraz was just, you're making fun. And then you take and you put it in the middle of a swamp. I felt bad for the guards and everybody. Welcome to Mosquito Land. Never mind, you're having weather that's 106 degree feels like. It was just brutal. Now they're closing it. And there's like $1 billion that supposedly the state has spent. It's hard to get verification of some of these numbers. $1 billion that the state has spent on Alligator Alcatraz, hoping to get reimbursement from the feds, which so far hasn't happened. So as the legislature starts looking at next year's budget, they may be finding themselves having a $1 billion bill they didn't expect. But I just, it was nonsense to even create the place to begin with. It was, and it's the kind of thing where, they didn't need to build it in the middle of a swamp. There were all kinds of other places they could have built the exact same thing and accomplished the same thing. But, this was all for show, and they didn't care. And Ron DeSantis didn't care about the humans that were involved.
Another topic that I wanted to bring up that I think about a lot, it always reminds me, politicians, Republican and Democrat, sometimes seem to always be talking about the issues of yesterday. If I had a penny for every time somebody legitimately said to me, I'm worried about where AI is going, what it'll mean for my jobs, what it'll mean for my life, what it'll mean for my children, what it'll mean for education, and positively, what it may mean for medical advances for me, how it may simplify my life, how it may help me take care of my elderly parents, what kind of breakthroughs it may make for me. And yet you don't hear a lot from either side in terms of people on the trail are making that a huge, coherent part of policy. There are some who are doing so, but you would think that would be, to borrow a phrase, top of mind. And we seem to always be talking about policies just saying that you can think of little that's going to impact, if you read all the headlines, our lives more one way or the other than AI. And yet you don't hear a lot about it. Why are we always having yesterday's debates when we need to be looking at the debates that are going to shape our tomorrow so in such a profound way?
I think
we're always playing catch up.
Yeah, I think it's hard to comprehend for a lot of people. They sort of know generically AI is this big thing that's going to show up. Is it going to be good or is it going to be bad? People have tended to focus more on data centers. Mm-hmm. Almost every community now is raising hell if there's a data center coming near them.
Including some in our community.
Yeah, right. And all over Florida,
Sure.
There's been some concerns about data centers and trying to stop them. That's easy to focus on. You're going to put a data center up in my neighborhood, and I don't want a data center there. So, that's not AI, which is all kinds of things. And, people have played with ChatGPT and some other things. And, a lot of people like it when they play with those little things. But I think the overall concept is AI going to be taking over the world? Are we all going to be reporting to robots? I think people haven't quite gotten there yet in their thinking because we don't really know where we're at with AI.
Well, we may not be there yet, and it may not be this cycle, but I certainly think within the next couple of years, the demand that you have coherent policies for, I think it's going to be a benchmark test for candidates running, because you could argue that us average schmoes, okay, don't overthink it, but you are electing people to help you make decisions about what guardrails there need to be, about
We
about all
should-
the pros and
I
cons.
agree. The legislature should have, while they're busy, fiddling with all kinds of other stuff, they should have formed a special commission to look at AI. What will the impact be on Florida?
Good and bad.
Good and right. A committee that just studies it and report back to us in 6 months. Give us another report in a year. Give us another report in 18 months. But the legislature often doesn't think like that. Instead, they would do things like, in the age of AI, that's going to fix everything. One of the bills that they quietly passed without anybody noticing, except Jason Garcia at Seeking Rents, who is an expert at finding just
It's fantastic.
fantastic baloney. Well, apparently backed by billionaire owners of the Bremen auto
Empire.
empire. That's how you become a billionaire, by having an empire. They came up with this legislation where to continue to prevent anybody from buying a car other than through a dealer. In this day and age, why can't I buy a car online? Why do I have to go through a dealer? Why can't I buy directly from the manufacturer online? Well, this is all to protect dealers, and God knows everybody's in love with dealers. But, and so
You didn't sound sincere about that.
Yeah, so they passed. Apparently, there was there was one manufacturer about to make a small Scout Motors. So they sell electric pickups and XUV, and they wanted to sell it directly to consumers, and they say no.
Rear guard
I'm ready.
actions
I'm
when we're ready for tomorrow.
Turn the dealers and auto mechanics alone and just let me buy my car direct.
Well, it's going to be interesting to me in Florida, which, everybody you ever sit down politically on either side of the aisle trumpets, leadership, the Space Coast, space age, high tech, and all of that. And yet, be interesting to me. I haven't heard anybody yet who sat down that I've really listened to, correct me if I'm wrong, in Florida so far, is really saying, here's what we want to do for our coherent policy on where we feel about. I mean, there's been some talk about, make sure we put these guardrails around AI, but they mostly revolve around the political implications as each party sees them.
And there's
But,
some things to protect kids.
yeah, and absolutely,
You know.
and should be more.
Right.
Many would argue.
Well, I have an easy protection.
Yeah.
I know how to protect kids.
Yes,
It's
I know
called it's called the parents.
Yes, yeah. And,
Yeah.
and matter of fact, that's a topic near and dear to my heart. And one of our guests I want to have on board was somebody I interviewed not long ago about talking about the need. But again, this goes back to our political class saying we got to be thinking about these safeguards. And he talked about the fact that kids' products and the like are starting to have AI built right into them. So we need to get ahead of the game about what kind of guardrails we put around these kind of things to protect our children and the like. So a little far afield, particularly from candidates and who's running where, but it put me to mind, Brian.
it's
It
a good
always
question.
intrigues me. We
But-
talk about all this political junky stuff, and yet the things people are talking about they're going to
But
affect
you're
their
right on
lives
the
and
money
children,
there.
they don't.
The candidates should be asked about AI.
Yeah,
And they should be asked very specific questions about AI.
all of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, final thoughts, my friend?
Well, I am not AI.
You're not.
Really, I'm not AI. I know it looks like I might be AI, but
He's high.
really, I'm
He's
not.
high.
Right.
He's human
Now
intelligence.
Mike, on the other hand.
And
So on that note,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for watching or listening. And if you're not a subscriber, this AI guy says subscribe.